Madrid, Salamanca neighborhood. Carlos Mendoza's 3-year-old twins had never walked. Pablo and Diego, diagnosed with a rare neurological condition, had been examined by 14 specialists across 4 continents. The verdict was unanimous: they would never walk normally. Then came Carmen, 26 years old, a nanny with a modest resume and a secret. On her first day, instead of following the strict therapeutic protocol, Carlos found her singing an old flamenco lullaby while gently moving the boys' legs as if they were dancing to Hilarious. The twins laughed in a way they hadn't in months. 3 weeks later, when Carlos came home early and saw them standing on the kitchen countertop, Carmen holding their hands as they flew, he realized this young woman was hiding something extraordinary. What he discovered about her would change not only his son's future, but his own. Carlos Mendoza's penthouse dominated the Madrid skyline like a fortress of glass and steel, 3,000 square feet of minimalist perfection that concealed a constant, dull ache. It was an October Monday when Carmen Ruiz first stepped across the threshold of a home that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine but lacked any trace of human warmth. Carlos had hired her out of desperation. 17 specialized nannies had already quit, overwhelmed by the twins' complex medical needs and the oppressive atmosphere that hung over the luxurious rooms. On paper, Carmen, with her 26 years and experience limited to ordinary families in Mostels and Vallecas, was the least qualified candidate. Yet during the interview, something in her eyes, a mix of determination and gentleness that Carlos couldn't quite name, convinced him to give her a chance. The twins were in their bedroom when Carmen saw them for the first time. 3 years of life overshadowed by a diagnosis that had crushed all hope. Their mother, Isabel, had died of grief 6 months earlier, unable to accept the medical sentence. The room looked more like a hospital ward than a child's bedroom: physiotherapy equipment, specialized chairs, postural supports, tablets running cognitive stimulation programs. The boys, beautiful, with their father's brown hair and green eyes, sat motionless in their adaptive seats, their legs hanging limp like broken dolls. Carlos began explaining the protocol in the flat, mechanical voice of a man who had turned grief into corporate efficiency: medication schedules, specific exercises, neurological stimulation routines. He stopped when he realized Carmen wasn't listening. She had knelt in front of the twins and was looking straight into their eyes with an intensity that unsettled him. Then, without warning, she began to sing. Not a typical children's song, but an ancient flamenco melody, full of deep, soulful cries that seemed to rise from the heart of Andalusia itself. Her hands gently took Pablo's little feet and started moving them rhythmically, as if teaching delicate puppets dance steps. Carlos was about to intervene, remind her that the boys had no sensation in their legs, when he heard something that froze him in place. The twins were laughing. Not the polite smiles they gave doctors, but real, bubbling laughter they hadn't shown in months. Carmen continued for 20 minutes, alternating song with whispered stories that sounded like tales from distant worlds, moving their legs in ever-changing patterns, tracing invisible geometries in the air. Diego reached out his little hands toward her, something he'd never done with a stranger. Pablo made guttural sounds, as if trying to sing along. When Carmen stood, her eyes met Carlos's. There was a depth in that gaze, an ancient wisdom that didn't belong to a 26-year-old. She simply said the boys weren't prisoners of their bodies, but of the fear that surrounded them, the fear of adults who had stopped believing in what was possible. The children sensed it and stopped trying. Carlos, the man who struck fear into boardrooms across Europe, found himself speechless. He looked at his sons and saw a spark in their eyes that had been absent for far too long. He left Carmen alone with them and retreated to his office, where security cameras allowed him to watch unseen. There, for the first time since Isabel's death, he let himself cry. From the cameras he saw Carmen continue her strange ritual. She took the boys out of their special chairs and placed them on the rug, not in the therapist-recommended position, but sitting normally against cushions. She took their little hands and started a clapping game that followed a rhythm only the 3 of them seemed to hear. Over the following days, subtle but undeniable changes appeared. The twins ate with better appetite, slept more soundly, and constantly sought Carmen with their eyes, like sunflowers turning toward the light. She had turned every daily routine into something magical. Physiotherapy became a cosmic dance. Meals turned into sensory adventures. Bath time was a voyage across uncharted seas. At the end of the second week, Carlos witnessed the impossible. He'd come home early after a cancelled video call and heard rhythmic, almost tribal music coming from the kitchen. He approached quietly and what he saw left him stunned. Carmen had placed the twins standing on the black granite countertop. Their little legs, declared permanently paralyzed by the world's top neurologists, were moving. Small, almost imperceptible movements, but their feet responded to the rhythm. Their knees bent slightly, as if muscles were remembering an ancient memory. Carmen held them under the arms, singing that strange flamenco lullaby. And the boys weren't just standing, they seemed to be trying to jump, to dance with her. Carlos stayed hidden behind the door, his heart pounding louder than the music. MRIs showed irreversible damage. Neurological tests confirmed the impossibility of what he was seeing. Yet there they were, his children moving legs science had declared dead. 3 weeks passed like a waking dream. The twins' progress defied all known medical logic. They didn't just move their legs during sessions with Carmen, they began trying to stand on their own, pulling themselves up on furniture with a determination Carlos had never seen in them. Dr. Sanchez Puerta, the neurologist at La Paz Hospital and an international authority, was speechless during the latest visit. New scans showed activity in previously silent brain areas, as if someone had flipped switches medicine believed were permanently burned out. The doctor shook his head, unable to offer a scientific explanation, muttering something about statistically impossible spontaneous remissions. Carlos began working from home more and more. Officially to monitor his son's progress, but really because he was obsessed with understanding Carmen. He watched her through the security cameras, noticing patterns the casual eye would miss. Every movement followed precise geometry. Every song used specific frequencies repeated with calculated variations. There was method in what looked like improvisation. Background checks on Carmen Ruiz revealed an apparently ordinary life. Humble family from Seville, high school diploma, a few pedagogy courses. But there were unexplained gaps. 2 years, from age 18 to 20, when she seemed to vanish completely. No jobs, no social media, no trace. One night, after the twins fell asleep clutching dolls Carmen had given them, dolls that calmed them better than any medication, Carlos confronted her in the living room. The house was silent. Madrid glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, and tension crackled in the air between them. He asked directly who she really was. Carmen studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth he could handle. Then she told a story that seemed to belong to another era. Her grandmother, the last of a line of healers from the Sierra de Aracena, had passed down knowledge that modern medicine was only beginning to touch. Not superstition, but a deep understanding of how body and mind connect through frequencies and rhythms Western science ignored. At 18, after her grandmother's death, Carmen had left home. She traveled to India and Tibet, to remote monasteries where ancient monks guarded techniques for awakening neural pathways through sound and movement. Western medicine, she explained calmly, saw the body as a machine with parts to fix or replace. But the body was more like an orchestra that had forgotten its symphony. The twins weren't paralyzed in a mechanical sense. The trauma of their premature birth, compounded by prolonged oxygen deprivation, had created a disconnect, like a computer in safe mode, waiting for the right command to reboot. Her method combined rhythmic stimulation based on ancient healing frequencies, movements that followed primordial fetal development patterns, and, above all, absolute conviction that healing was possible. The children sensed that certainty, and their bodies responded by remembering abilities that were buried, not destroyed. Before Carlos could process it all, a noise from the boys' room sent them running. They found Pablo standing in his crib, gripping the rails with fierce determination while Diego tried to copy him. These weren't involuntary spasms or random reflexes. It was pure will. The desire to reach a toy Carmen had strategically placed just out of reach. Carlos dropped to his knees in front of the crib, overwhelmed. Then the real miracle happened. Pablo let go of the rails and took a step toward his father. An unsteady, wobbly step like any toddler's first, but real. Diego, seeing his brother, stood too and, using Pablo for balance, followed. In that moonlit room, with his sons taking their first steps, Carlos understood that Carmen wasn't just a nanny with unconventional methods. She was the miracle he had stopped believing in, embodied in a 26-year-old woman carrying centuries of forgotten wisdom. 2 months later, the Mendoza home pulsed with new life. The twins ran through the hallways, their laughter filling spaces that had been silent for too long. Dr. Sanchez Puerta brought European colleagues to study the case. Scans showed impossible neural regeneration. Carlos spent afternoons at Retiro Park watching his sons conquer slides they once could only stare at from wheelchairs. Carmen had turned daily life into magic, morning massages with rosemary oil, meals accompanied by flamenco percussion, evenings dancing under Madrid's stars. He watched her cook gazpacho while the twins helped, and he knew he had fallen in love. It wasn't just gratitude. It was how she turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. But Carmen kept a professional distance, disappearing every night. Following her discreetly one evening, Carlos discovered her secret, an abandoned chapel in Lavapiés where she guided 30 broken people toward healing. Old men with canes, children in wheelchairs, all moving to the beat of flamenco box drums. A boy with cerebral palsy raised his arm for the first time. A woman with Parkinson's stopped trembling during the session. Carmen hadn't come to them by chance. She was a healer who absorbed others' pain and transformed it into hope. That was why she kept her distance. Every deep connection meant carrying someone else's suffering. When Carlos finally entered the San Isidro chapel with the twins, at Carmen's written invitation, he found a thriving hidden community. 30 people of every background moved together, making music with box drums and ancestral harmonies. The twins joined instinctively, welcomed by other children without pity or curiosity. Roberto, a former flamenco guitarist in a wheelchair, told how Carmen had given him back his music after his accident. A mother spoke of her autistic son who had started speaking again. Each story testified to Carmen's gentle awakening, not forcing healing, but reminding the body it already knew how. On the drive home, with the twins asleep, Carlos asked why she'd kept the place secret. On the Segovia Bridge, Carmen explained that secrecy protected the hope of people who had nothing else. The world wasn't ready to accept that movement and sound could heal. Carlos made 2 decisions: fund a proper center where Carmen's work could happen openly, and tear down the professional wall between them. He didn't want her just as his son's healer, he wanted her as part of their family. Madrid's spring burst with violent color, mirroring the changes in Carlos's life. The center he was funding took shape in an old convent in Carabanchel, a vast space Carmen was carefully transforming into what she called the Garden of Possibilities. Renowned architects worked to her seemingly eccentric specifications: rooms with special acoustics to amplify certain frequencies, floors with varied textures to stimulate bare feet, sensory gardens where every plant was chosen for its therapeutic properties. The twins were now indistinguishable from any other children their age. They ran through Retiro Park, fought over toys, climbed everything with the boundless energy of healthy childhood. Their personalities, long suppressed by illness, emerged strongly. Pablo the fearless explorer, Diego the thoughtful observer. Dr. Sanchez Puerta published papers attempting scientific explanations, accelerated neuroplasticity, integrated multisensory stimulation, neural compensation mechanisms. But privately, over a glass of Rioja, he admitted Carmen's method transcended current medical understanding. For Carlos, the deepest change was internal. The man who had built a tech empire through cold calculation and ruthless drive had discovered joy in small things. A spontaneous laugh from his sons could interrupt the most important conference call. A crooked drawing on the fridge meant more than any quarterly report. Yet a shadow remained. Carmen kept her professional distance. She was present, devoted, loving with the boys. But every personal advance from Carlos was gently deflected, like dancing with a ghost, always close but never truly within reach. The situation reached its breaking point one May evening. Carlos had organized a dinner to celebrate the twins' progress, inviting close friends who had supported him through the dark years. Carmen cooked dishes blending Andalusian tradition with flavors from her travels, and the evening was perfect in its simple elegance. After the guests left and the children slept peacefully, Carlos found Carmen on the terrace. Madrid sparkled below them, and the air carried the jasmine scent that announced summer. It was time, he decided. He couldn't live in the gray area between gratitude and love any longer. The words poured out. He confessed he had fallen in love. Not just for the miracle she'd performed, but for 1,000 small daily gestures, for how she turned ordinary moments into magic, for how she had brought light back to a home shrouded in darkness for too long. He asked her to stay, not as an employee, but as his partner, as a mother to his sons, as the woman he wanted to love. Carmen listened with shining eyes. When she spoke, her voice trembled. She admitted she felt something too. That it was impossible not to grow attached to this family that had become the center of her world. But there was something Carlos didn't know, something that changed everything. Her gift wasn't just from ancient teachings. Carmen had a rare neurological condition, an extreme form of synesthesia that let her perceive others' bodily frequencies as colors and sounds. She could literally see energy blockages and hear disharmonies in the nervous system. It was an extraordinary ability, but also a terrible burden. Deep physical contact meant absorbing the other person's emotions and pain, feeling them as her own. Touching Carlos intimately would mean experiencing all his grief for Isabel, all his anguish over the boys, the full weight of years of suffering. She wasn't sure she could survive that emotional intensity and keep her sanity. Carlos looked at her with new eyes, finally understanding the price she paid daily to heal others. But he understood something else too. He proposed a pact. He would begin his own emotional healing journey, process his grief and guilt, release the weight he carried, not for her, but for himself and his sons. When he was ready, when he could offer her not his pain but his strength, they would try again. Carmen looked at him in wonder, and with something like hope. She agreed to stay. To walk the path with him, no longer as an employee, but as a friend, a guide, and perhaps, when they were both ready, something more. 1 year after that terrace confession, the Garden of Possibilities opened its doors on a bright spring day. Hundreds came, families with disabled children seeking hope, curious doctors wanting to see Carmen's method in action, journalists drawn by the Mendoza twins' miracle story, and above all the chapel community, finally with a proper home. The twins, now almost 5, tore through the gardens like little tornadoes, organizing games and leading other children on imaginary adventures. They had become the center's small ambassadors, living proof that impossible was just a word. Pablo had even joined a local Atletico Madrid youth soccer team, while Diego showed early talent for music, playing simple rhythms on the box drum during group sessions. Carlos was transformed. 6 months of intensive therapy, participation in chapel sessions, and brutal confrontation with his inner demons had changed him deeply. He remained a successful CEO, but now with emotional depth that made him a more empathetic leader, a more present father, a more complete man. The most moving moment of the opening came when Carmen took the small stage in the main garden. Spring sunlight created a halo around her hair as she spoke about the center's vision. How every person carries the seed of their own healing. She explained that movement and sound were merely keys to unlock doors trauma had closed, and that true power lay in community, mutual support, unconditional love. Then she called some of the center's miracles to the stage. Roberto played a bulería he had composed on flamenco guitar, his hands imperfect, but the music soul-touching. A girl who had been mute for years recited a Lorca poem in a clear voice. A boy with muscular dystrophy took several steps unaided, each one a victory over medical predictions. But the moment that took everyone's breath away was when Pablo and Diego climbed the stage. With the serious charm of children who have something important to say, they announced that Carmen was going to become their new mom. Not instead of the mom who's in heaven, Diego clarified solemnly, but the mom here on earth who helps us grow. The crowd fell silent as Carlos joined them on stage. He knelt before Carmen, not theatrically, but because he needed to meet her eyes as an equal, and took out not a flashy diamond ring, but a simple silver band engraved with a Sanskrit phrase she had taught him during his healing journey. His words were simple but carried the weight of a year of transformation. He told her he had done the work, faced his demons, learned to carry his pain without unloading it on others. He showed her his hands, they no longer shook. He said he could now offer her not the burden of his suffering, but the strength of his rebirth. Carmen looked at him, and with her special perception she no longer saw the darkness of pain, but the light of hope. No longer fear, but love. For the first time since arriving in that home, she let Carlos truly touch her. The kiss that followed was met with thunderous applause, the joyful laughter of the twins jumping around them, and that rare, precious feeling when the universe aligns perfectly. The next day's El País headline read "The Madrid Miracle," but it only scratched the surface. It couldn't capture the nights Carmen cried from exhaustion, carrying the emotional weight of her patience. It didn't describe Carlos's doubts, the moments he feared he wasn't healed enough for her. It missed the daily small victories of the center's children, each step taken, each word spoken, each smile won from disability. 5 years later, the Garden of Possibilities had become a model replicated across Spain and Latin America. Carmen had trained dozens of therapists in her method, always emphasizing that technique was secondary to unconditional love for each patient. The twins, now 8, were extraordinarily ordinary in their exceptionality. Pablo defended every marginalized child at school. Diego composed little flamenco melodies he played in children's hospitals to cheer young patients. And there was little Isabel, born 2 years after the wedding, who seemed to have inherited Carmen's gift. At 3, she moved her hands to invisible rhythms, calmed the most agitated children at the center with her mere presence, and described colors around people with the innocent precision of childhood. The last family photo, taken in the center's garden during the 5th anniversary celebration, showed all 5 of them. Carlos in jeans and a t-shirt, light years from the Armani-suited CEO he once was. Carmen radiant, holding Isabel who played with her hair. The twins making faces behind their parents' backs. Around them, dozens of children of every ability played together in a garden where the word impossible had lost all meaning. On the center's main wall, Pablo and Diego, with help from the other kids, had painted a mural. It showed colorful figures dancing together, some in wheelchairs, some on crutches, some running free. Beneath it, in Diego's determined but shaky handwriting, were the words, "Here, nobody is broken. Some of us are just learning different dance steps." In that home, once a fortress of pain and now ringing with laughter. In that center, a beacon of hope for thousands of families. In that impossible family, born of a miracle and grown in love, the story continued. Every day brought new challenges and new triumphs. But one thing was certain, that incredible gesture by the young nanny on her first day, making 2 paralyzed boys fly above a kitchen countertop, had sent out ripples that kept spreading, touching lives, creating hope, proving that sometimes miracles don't come from heaven, but from the hands of someone brave enough to believe in the impossible.